Today we're going to be doing Unit 7, solving quadratic equations, Lesson 5, which is solving quadratics. So we're going to be kind of repeating a little bit of what we learned in the past. So what happens when the quadratic isn't factorable? How do we solve for x? The square root term can be used when there is no linear term in the quadratic. So the word here is linear. When there's no linear term in the quadratic. And does anybody know what letter represents the linear term? So it's not A, and it's not C. What is it?
B.
B. B is the linear term. It's the term with the x, typically. And you use this method when there is no B term. Okay, there's no term with just the x. So that's how you can identify that square root method is necessary. So moving on, let's go ahead and look at our first example using the square root method. So, first thing you do is you identify what you have. So as you can see, we have ax squared. And what are we missing here? Like we said, we would be missing b. So we have ax squared plus c. See, that's the format that we want in order to use the square root method. So we're missing the b. So the first thing I want you to do when you have this method, or using this method, is you're going to add or subtract, whatever you got to do, the other number to get it to this side right here. Okay? So you're going to get x squared by itself. So we're going to solve for x squared, and we do that by adding 4 to both sides. Everybody with me so far? Now, square root method means you're going to take the square root of both sides, because what you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other side. So we are going to take the square root of both sides. And when you do that, you end up with x equals, not just 2, but plus or minus 2. Okay? So we end up with a positive 2 and a negative 2. And I'm going to talk about why that's the case. So the reason that happens is, these are values that could be x, right? That would make the statement true. So what is negative 2 to the second power? 4. It makes it positive, right? So isn't it true that we could plug a negative 2 in here and still get 4? Which would make it a true statement. Hence why we need to have a plus and a minus solution. And you'll notice this happens when you solve with square root methods. Okay? So is everybody good with example 1? Alright, let's go ahead and move on to example 2. We have 2 people waiting in the lobby. Hang on. Alright, moving on to example 2. First thing we're going to do is we see that we don't have a b term, so you need to get the 64 to the other side. So to do that, we do reverse operation and we subtract. And we end up with x squared is equal to negative 64. Now, here's where you have to be careful. Now, the next natural step we would take is to square root both sides, right? But here's the problem. Can you take the square root of a negative number? No. So what's the answer here going to be? No. Solution. So you can't take the square root of a negative number. Important pro tip here. You can't take the square root of a negative number. So does anybody have any additional questions about that? Alright. Is everybody good to move on to the next? Alright. So the next one. We see that we're missing the x term. So we are going to solve for x squared by adding what to both sides? 11. We're going to add 11 to both sides. This cancels out and leaves you with 3x squared is equal to 12. Now your goal is to get x squared by itself, so how can I get rid of the 3 on the left?
Then you divide by 3.
Good. You divide both sides by 3.
Would that come out to the same answer as 1?
It would.
It's going to be by 4.
Good. And then we do what to both sides? Square root. And what's the square root of 4? Well, we have to put a plus or? Yeah. So you always get the positive version version as your answer.
On the test, do we have to write exactly that?
On the test, which I've actually already made, you have, if it's a multiple choice question, you have to pick both answers. So it'll be like a multi-select. But there's no like, there's not like a fill in the blank like that. But yeah, you do need to know that there's both answers. Is everybody good with number 3? Okay. Go ahead and try number 4. So the first thing you gotta do is you gotta get the squared stuff alone. So how can I get everything squared alone on one side of the equation? I need to get rid of the -9, and to do that I need to do what? Add 9. That leaves me with x plus 1 squared is equal to 9. And then I need to do what to both sides to get rid of the square? So the first thing you have to do is get rid of the second power, and to get rid of the second power, you take the square root. So we take the square root of both sides, and we get x plus 1 equals plus or minus what?
9.
What's the square root of 9?
3.
3. So when you get to this stage, this means you're going to have two equations, okay? We have one that has a -3, and one that has a what kind of 3? Positive 3. And then you're just going to solve each one of those equations to get the answer. So I would subtract 1 on both sides here, which gives me x equals -4. And for the other one, I would subtract 1 on both sides, which gives me x equals what? 3 minus 1 is? 2. So those are my two answers. Okay? Everybody feel okay with that? Everybody feel good about it? Alright, are we ready to move on to the next portion of the notes today? Okay. So, now we're going to talk about quadratic formula. Do you remember this formula from last year? Algebra 1? X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is just a formula, and this formula helps us find the solutions to any quadratic. Don't need to factor, don't need to make sure a is not negative. It works for every single quadratic. Okay, this is really important, and I may ask you on the quiz about this, these rules about it. So just FYI, it's an important note. I might ask you about when quadratic formula is useful. You have to know it's always useful. It works for every quadratic. So, from that, let's go ahead and try it out. So, the first thing you need to do in order to use quadratic formula is you need to make sure that your quadratic is in standard form. In order to be in standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. You need to have that format before you can do anything else. Now looking at my equation, is my equation in that format? No. What's the problem? It's not equal to 0. So I'm going to write it down here so we can write it a little bigger. Now our goal is going to be to get that 3 to the left side to get it, in standard form. So is this 3 positive or negative? Good. So to reverse addition, I do what operation? Subtraction. So I have to subtract the 3 over to the left side, which leaves me with 4x squared minus x minus 3 is equal to 0. And now, are we in standard form? Yes. So on the line, we can write our standard form quadratic filled in. And then from here, we need to identify a, b, and c. Now, a will be the coefficient of the x squared term. So what's the coefficient, oops, I didn't even do that. What's the coefficient of the x squared term?
4.
Good. What's the coefficient of the b term?
-1.
-1. Right here, there's an implied 1 right there, and it's negative. And what's my c?
-3.
-3. So once you have that, you're ready to use quadratic formula. Now, I'm just going to erase this because I need to have all the room I can get for this. So just so I have enough room to write big enough for you. So, the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that formula and you're going to plug in the a, the b, and the c that we just came up with, okay? So, I'm going to rewrite it, plugging everything in. Now, what do you notice about the b in the beginning of this formula? What's the sign of it? So what's going to happen to the b when I plug it in? Good. It's going to flip signs all the time. So if my b was negative, it's now going to be positive. So I have positive 1 plus or minus square root of b squared, put it in parentheses, okay? Minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And I'm going to highlight for you what I plugged in. So I plugged in here, 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 and here. Everything highlighted is what I plugged into the formula with what we have. So from here, you're just going to simplify. And the best way to do this is really just to use a calculator. So x is going to be equal to 1 plus or minus square root of. So, what's negative 1 times negative 1? Good. So we have 1. And then what's negative 4 times 4?
Negative 16.
Good. Well, yeah, negative 16. What's negative 16 times negative 3? Positive
Positive
48. Okay. So I just did this math and this math. All over, what's 2 times 4? 8.
negative 8.
So I'm going to move up here because I'm running out of room. X equals 1 plus or minus. What's 1 plus 4? I'm sorry, what's 1 plus 48? 49. What's the square root of 49? You're right. 7. So this just becomes 7. Everything under the root becomes 7. All over what? What's my denominator? 8. So, from here you get two separate equations. You get x equals 1 plus 7 over 8. That's one of them. And the other one you get is x equals 1 what? Minus 7 over 8. So you're going to solve each of those. Because that's what the plus or minus does. It makes two separate equations. What's 1 plus 7? What's 8 divided by 8? 1. What's 1 minus 7? Good. Negative 6 over 8. We can't do anything with that, but we can do what? We can reduce it, right? So what are these numbers both divisible by?
By 2.
Good. So this becomes negative 3 over what?
4.
4. Those are my two answers. Jet, you taking your notes down?
I'm not gonna pencil.
So why wouldn't you ask for one in the beginning? Like, seriously. Okay. Well, you have to come back to this one, but you need to block. So what about from here? Does anybody have any questions from here? Oh, the 7 comes from 1 plus 48, which is 49, the square root of 49. All right, you ready to do the last question together? Okay. All right, so first thing we look at, is this in standard form? Is it equal to 0? No. Standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So in order to get into standard form, I need to do what? Get rid of this? Good, I have to add it to the other side. So if it's negative, I add it to the other side. If it's positive, I subtract it to the other side. That leaves me with 2x squared minus 7x plus 0. Because negative 10 plus 10 is 0, right? So this is my standard form. So now we're going to identify A, B, and C. What's my A value here?
2.
B is?
-7.
C is?
0.
Good. We take our quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're going to plug into the formula. We get b or x equals. What's going to happen to my b when I plug it in here? It's going to be positive. Always change the sign. Okay? Plus or minus square root of -7 to the second power minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And then from here we just go ahead and simplify that. So x equals 7 plus or minus square root of. What's -7 times -7?
49.
Good. And what's -4 times 2?
Negative.
What's -8 times 0?
0.
So that just becomes -0 all over 4. What is 49 minus 0?
49.
What's the square root of 49? 7. So we have two answers, right? We have two versions. X equals 7 plus 7 over 4. And then x equals what? 7.
All right.
So one is positive, one is negative. So this one comes out to be 14 over 4, which reduces to 2/7. And this one over here, what's 7 minus 7?
0.
What's 0 divided by 4?
0.
So those are my two answers.